Now, you've mentioned a number of times ILUS's ambition to uplist Firebug Group and take it to NASDAQ. And in terms of listing on NASDAQ, I'm dying to know what your expected timeframe is for this.
There's obviously a lot of work to be done in order to be taken seriously on NASDAQ. You know, the step up from NASDAQ from the OTC is quite substantial. I think it's sort of underestimated by some of the shareholders. So we're in a rush to get there. You know, we feel that our technology and our business strategy and our execution will be valued, you know, much better by the bigger institutions and the bigger shareholders in the NASDAQ market, which obviously creates significant value for the current investor base in the OTC space. But in order to get to NASDAQ and to be taken seriously in NASDAQ, you know, we've got to put a lot of cornerstones in place. So we've got to get the corporate governance, you know, strong enough. We've got to build a strong enough board. So although we've got a very strong board at the moment, you know, board of executive directors, we've got to add some independent directors, which we've already got, but we've got to, you know, add a few more, you know, few more bums on seats around the table. And ultimately we need to create, so it's more than their corporate governance, we need to create, you know, increase our revenue. You know, although at the moment, you know, that they say that there's more billion-dollar companies on NASDAQ with zero revenue than there was during the dot-com era. We don't want to be in that category. You know, we're generating good revenue and we're growing very well and we've got a good customer base. But when we go up to NASDAQ, we want to be going on the front foot from a position of strength. We definitely don't want to be going there, you know, as a little Kickstarter off the OTC. That's certainly not, you know, not the approach we want to go. So, you know, to answer your question, I think the simple answer is ASAP. But realistically, we're probably looking at, you know, I'd like to say an 18-month window, but, you know, don't hold me to that. But, you know, we certainly want to get there as quick as possible.
And I guess the question that every shareholder is wondering is, will this mean you will need to do a reverse split of the stock?
We're very much hoping we don't need to. It's certainly not in our plans. Obviously, NASDAQ has a specific requirement that we need to meet. But we're relatively comfortable in the strategy that we're taking at the moment that it will be able to be avoided. And the reason I say this is, you know, the current shareholder structure, the current share structure is pretty good. You know, our float and the free trading shares is relatively low, and we have no real ambition to increase this. On the contrary, we have ambition to actually do share buybacks and claw those numbers back, which, you know, again will help us to avoid a reverse split. And we really see us being able to do this out of the new funding strategy that we'll announce in due course, which will give us a lot more liquidity and cash flow and a lot more cash to be able to execute a share buyback. So, you know, all in all, although we have to meet the NASDAQ requirement, we're relatively comfortable we'll be able to do it without a reverse split. Although there's no promises, it's certainly our ambition to avoid it.
And the question we're all dying to know now is, what's next? Can you share any news here, or can the shareholders expect an announcement of any acquisitions soon?
You know, as I think I've covered, we've got very aggressive plans for growth, and that means we can't stand still. That's the bottom line. So I think shareholders can continually expect news from us. I don't think there's going to be any period where there's a dormancy where nothing's coming out. However, that said, we don't want to make mistakes. So although we, you know, have got numerous acquisitions in the pipeline, numerous acquisitions going through the due diligence process, you know, if we're not totally satisfied that something meets our requirement, we're able to manage it, we're able to add value, we won't execute a deal just purely for the sake of executing a deal. But we have a strong enough pipeline of acquisition deals that we're working on, so there should be a continual feed of those. We're specifically looking, you know, for aggressively for an acquisition target in the US. We're in discussions with a few to roll out our EV vehicle and some of our technology into the US market, and then start to create that as the footprint. But, you know, I think the big news, the imminent news, which links back to our share buybacks and, you know, our biggest strategy, and which we've discussed a few times on our Twitter platform, is around our funding strategy. So we've reached a strategic agreement and signed a strategic alliance agreement with Toto Capital, which is a family office financing operation. And it's actually a two-pronged agreement with them. So the first part is a licensing agreement around the ILUS brand. So we have licensed them to use the ILUS brand to produce an ILUS crypto coin. Wow. On technical terms, it's a token, but, you know, for simple sake, let's call it a coin. So the ILUS coin will be released into the market very, very soon. There will be a lot of publicity and news around that, operated by the Toto finance business. And that will allow our existing shareholders potentially, if they're in the crypto space, to participate in that in that model. The modern generation are very much into the crypto model. We're very conscious that this is not an ILUS coin operated inside ILUS. This is not owned by us. It's not a security token. It's classified as a utility token the way it's structured. And really, what that coin does is it allows ILUS to get funding from Toto Capital. So Toto Capital will be injecting a significant amount of capital into the ILUS business as preference shares. It also has to pay ILUS a significant royalty from any of the coin sales that it does. And a big positive for both the customer base and ILUS, which ultimately is for shareholder benefit, is that Toto will provide vendor finance to the ILUS customers. So any customer, let's say a volunteer fire brigade in California or wherever they might be, they might need to buy 3 or 4 vehicles but don't have the cash flow or the capital to lay out money up front. On that basis, they would be able to place the order with ILUS, get the vehicles delivered from ILUS, and ILUS would be paid. But that volunteer fire brigade would then pay a leasing fee or a finance fee, monthly or quarterly, to Toto Capital. And then Toto Capital will, do as they need to do, as whatever their agreements is with their coin holders. So, we're very comfortable that capital injection through our into our ILUS business will allow us to execute our acquisitions, our growth, and ultimately allow us to do that without issuing more shares. So, answering the shareholders' questions of dilution, that ultimately should mean that we will be able to get the cash we need without issuing more shares. And we should have surplus funds available, which will allow us to execute share buybacks, which again should hopefully be able to avoid the reverse split from that.
And how exactly will Toto be investing in ILUS?
We've created quite an interesting share category. It's called the Preference E share, and basically it functions similar to almost a quasi loan, but it's not a loan; it's an equity. It's a share. And the way it's structured is it's a fixed share, a $1 share price. It's not trading on the OTC market. It's a fixed share. It has a redemption price of $1.15, and the company has to redeem. So Ilusinternational has to redeem 1.15% per quarter of those shares. So an investor can acquire preference E shares for $1, and we have to redeem them at 1.15% every quarter, and the redemption price is $1.15. So that delivers a return to the investor, a dividend. It pays a dividend annually, which again is significant value for Toto Capital. And the shares, in terms of the current shareholder base, they're non-convertible, so they'll never be washed and diluted into our trading stock. They're non-voting, so again, it keeps the control of the company the way it's currently structured, and ultimately they're non-cumulative, which means it doesn't put unnecessary pressure either on ILUS company's cash flow with any clawback risk from Toto Capital. So should there be a window, we're relatively comfortable in our projections, relatively comfortable in our cash flows. We should have significant, ample cash to operate smoothly and service that redemption. But should it miss a quarter of the redemption, it doesn't accumulate and double up next quarter. It basically just all slips on a quarter. But we're quite comfortable on that basis. So the Toto investment will come into ILUS as preference shares. They will be acquiring preference shares. So hopefully that will add significant value to everybody. And then the second part of their investment is not directly into ILUS. It's actually the trade finance of where they finance a customer, which they'll do their own credit profile and their own due diligence on those particular customers, whether the debt is serviceable or not.
Okay, it's now time to wrap, I'm afraid. Thank you so much for speaking to me. And I have to say, it seems ILUS has some very exciting times ahead, and I'm sure your shareholders will be 100% on board and watching every development eagerly. So thank you so much for joining me today.